Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm with Paul
Good, thank
Hanford.
you. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
I'm really excited to talk to you because I know we've had some chats and your podcast, by the way, brilliant. And as a musician myself, and I don't know how you're getting the guests in. I mean, really, every episode, I'm like, wow, you're speaking to Peaches, which was what the last one, uh, the dude from Sonic Youth. You didn't get Tricky on, but you did actually do a really nice interview with him, which remember I was reflecting just on messaging that I've seen him in my neighborhood because I think he lives pretty close to where we are. But I was always a bit sheepish or nervous, a bit starstruck to even go near him.
I think a lot of people, I spoke to a few people actually, and like he's definitely someone that seems to get spotted a lot in Prenzlauer Berg going into bio company. And there's a cafe I think that he goes into, but someone else I know sees him and around a lot. He's definitely someone that leaves his very visible footprint around the neighborhood. Yeah, but I found him to be just a really, really nice guy, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad it was a good interview for you. And I really respect him as an artist. I mean, he's got such a rich history, right? And I guess that's quite normal for Berlin, right? And a good segue into, I'm curious, so how did you end up in Berlin? I know we had, some chats offline and stuff, but I'm just curious, how did you get to Berlin? And the second bit is, why did you start Lost and Found, your podcast?
I came here first time about 8 years ago, and I didn't really have any kind of curiosity over Berlin at the time. It was more that I was doing some writing, and someone on Facebook, a friend of a friend on Facebook, wanted to come to London for a month. So we organized, who lived in Berlin, and so we organized a room swap, really. And it was like February and really cold. And to be honest, apart from the history of the city just generally, all I knew about Berlin culturally, I hadn't heard of Berghain. I hadn't, I wasn't really sort of, I'm a DJ, I wasn't really massively clued up into that. But I was really interested in the kind of Bowie stuff that happened here, and that Nick Cave was here and stuff like that. And that was my entry point. But so I just really liked the idea of going somewhere where I didn't know anyone for a month, writing a book, it being really cold, and just that kind of bleak romance of the writer being somewhere cold and way more into Europe than London is. And then I got here, and then I did do that, but I also kind of went to Berghain the second time. Obviously, the first time I didn't get in, and I queued for an hour, and I just had no idea. I hadn't even heard of Berghain when I was queuing up, and so I couldn't work out why all of the coolest looking people, in terms of like what London would view would be being cool, were being turned away. And I was thinking, is the club closed already? This is really early for it to be closed, because all the kids are leaving. And then it kind of sort of dawned on me as I didn't get in that it was just very different there. And then second time I went, kind of just kept my head down, looked miserable, and got in. Pardon me. And but yeah, so I kind of just fell in love with it. Really fell in love with the city. I started making friends here, and then every time I could afford to go away, which would be twice a year, I'd mostly end up going back to Berlin, because it was just in my blood, really, by that point. And then when I think about 3 years ago, I came out of a relationship and I didn't have anywhere to live. And I was kind of just sort of house sitting for people. And Brexit was happening as well. And I just kind of thought that if I'm going to do, I don't really have anything to lose here. I was DJing in London every weekend, but I wasn't very happy DJing in London, really. And I just thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. Why don't I if I'm going to leave England, it's got to be now, really. If I want to sort of see what it's like to be someone that lives outside of the country I was born in, and yeah, that's. So I just kind of came here for a month. I had the idea of doing the podcast, and there was luckily some Arts Council funding going around, and I applied for it and was really surprised to get it, really. And
That's brilliant. You got the funding, and I guess crucially before Brexit as well, because I think we both agree that it's not the best move for our respective country, our native country, should I say. And yeah, I ended up here on a similar path. I was ending a relationship, and to be fair, I was kind of like a bit lost and clueless at the time.
Yeah.
And I had a friend here, and I've been here myself because obviously I'm a DJ as well, or it was in the past, not so much now. But yeah, when I got here, I was kind of like, well, I've got nothing to lose, and it's cooler than where I was. Let's just go with it, right?
Yeah, and probably a bit cheaper as well, like at the time.
Very important for people listening to understand that. Yeah, that I'm not going to lie, that was definitely a plus point because okay, I didn't live in London, but I came from the UAE. I was actually living in Abu Dhabi at the time.
Oh yeah,
It's not a place you can sit in a holding pattern. It's even more expensive than London. So
yeah, right, definitely. And it's like it's kind of weird because once you live in Berlin, you kind of become aware of the way you become more in tune with the gentrification here and the harms of it, and how like as an English person, I'm potentially contributing to that as well. But as an English person, you kind of, as an artist, sort of basically prized out a lot of the time of living in parts of London that only a couple of years beforehand were affordable, and I'm only just like on one part of this stage of gentrification that's like about 53 layers in, people that are affected a million times worse than me, and you kind of, it does, on the surface, it seems like quite ideal to move to Berlin where it is cheaper, before you get to kind of understand that it's maybe cheaper for some people, but not for others.
Yeah, I guess who you speak to, right? I mean, I know that, I still love this city, hence why I'm still living here. And it all, the thing about Berlin, this could be an episode about, all the stuff we love about Berlin, right?
Yeah.
But genuinely, the thing I love about this place is when I get a bit, it's stale, and moaning to my wife, and, for people listening, I live in Prenzlauer Berg, which is kind of like a posh area, right? And I'm complaining to my wife saying, all these people gentrifying our area. And she's like, aren't you one of them?
Yeah, Prenzlauer Berg is kind of like, for Londoners, for people in England listening, Prenzlauer Berg is kind of the sort of Islington, isn't it? It's like Church Street in Stoke Newington, or like, I guess, sort of like the nicest bit of Williamsburg in New York.
Yeah. And it's funny that I'm complaining about, all these people coming in, and then, the friends and Mira is like, you are one of them, just shut up, stop moaning, enjoy the place, But yeah, whenever I get that way, or I'm worried about, it's getting stale, it's less about art here, and it's, it's not, something's missing, then I get surprised in a really wonderful way because something new happens, or there's a new scene emerged, or I mean, it's such a wonderful place where you can find yourself as an artist, and also the opposite end of the spectrum, get completely lost if that's the way you want to go, right? Because I know the first year I came here, I kind of decompressed and I needed it. I was leaving a load of things behind, and although you could argue that I wasted time and money, and I wasn't really doing as many things for work, and it's just something I needed to do, right? I was going to ask you, so you started the podcast, and we talked about this before we were recording. I really, really do love it because I like the mix of the way you have a really deep conversation with an artist, and the way that you talk to them. It's so connected in terms of being human that there doesn't seem to be any barrier between you and the artist. I mean, Peaches seemed really relaxed, really reflective. I mean, it could be because of COVID, right? I mean, we're all getting relaxed and reflective because we're stuck in our houses, but you seem to have a way. You're very relaxed about, getting what you want from them, and, building that narrative so people can get something really, tangible if you're an audience or the listener. And what I loved is the way you top and tail it from, your ramblings and reflections as you start, and then, the bit at the end just kind of seals it off for me. And what I was saying before, I might nick that for our podcast as well.
Go for it. I nicked it from someone else, so...
And do you find that helps you frame the episode as well? Do you think about that before you speak to the artist, or is it more you just tee up these interviews and then you see how it just plays out and how it transpires?
You mean doing the top and tail bits beforehand, or no? That always comes at the end. That's always got to be kind of reflective.
Yeah.
Like I do view like doing interviews myself. I think everyone's got lots of different approaches, and they're all really valid. But for me, what I try to do is to just sort of, I see it as mostly like being a portrait photographer, really, and I'm just trying to capture like a moment on a day with someone that also maybe tells a bit about their life and what they've done, and also like kind of maybe shows a little bit about like myself as well. Like I think I've just got out of the habit. I'm trying to be much better about leaving mistakes in, and obviously not bad mistakes, but not going too over the top with the editing and stuff. Like I used to edit out all of the ums and ahs and likes. Then I kind of realized that it's almost like you end up with like one of those sorts of, you've spoken to someone on an automated phone or something like that. How was your album? And it's really, really weird. And so I think it's just about, I guess, feeling just really comfortable, really, with the whole process. Yeah. Sorry, I can't remember what the question is.
I can identify with that as well, because when you first start out innocently, right, you start to think you need to polish it. Similar to, I know you've made music as well, so it's that trap you can fall in, trying to set or chase perfection, right? So yeah, I just stopped doing that. We very rarely edit anything out unless I've got someone into trouble, or I'm swearing too much, or a guest has got nervous, which is really rare. About we can't include that because I talked about something sensitive. So yeah, the more natural you can leave it, and just trust that people, if you've got an audience, just trust in the audience, because who are we to say what's going to resonate with people as well? And I guess no one really cares about the technical stuff, or at least that's what we were talking about before we recorded, right? That you can really spend hours and hours making it sound a certain way. But if I'm honest, I don't think anyone really appreciates that. What they really dig is a real human connection in the conversation and something tangible. So if you're speaking to a musician, people want to know about that artist and hear something human and something true about them, right?
Well, I think for me, it's like I know when something feels right, and sometimes that requires a lot of work and editing, and sometimes it's just leave it as it is. And I think there's a sort of like I think the Coen brothers used to say that their main job as directing was that they were like in charge of like, they were like tone police. Like everything they had to they just like making sure that the tone was right. And I guess that is probably the way that I know if something's right, is once I feel, I'll get like a little feeling that something just feels that it flows and it's right, it's just really instinctive, isn't it? And sometimes you do have to put more work in to make it sound good. And other times it's a lot less work, really, and it's just that finding that little, that biting point, I guess,
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. When you know it's right, you don't need to fiddle, and you just put it out there, right? And yeah, we've had a few, but I think that the more we've interviewed people, and you just get comfortable, right? And you just it becomes more intuitive,
Yeah, it's a bit like, I think like using like like again, sort of, I'm not a photographer at all. I know fuck all about photography, but like I kind of get the idea if I'm speaking to friends that sometimes they try to get so much, you can get more like before the editing right. Like the sort of editing kind of maybe goes into the research now for me beforehand, like how I kind of think about how I want to speak with someone, rather than kind of covering, putting loads of effects on afterwards to cover it up. Sometimes that can be good as well, but I think I used to do a lot of editing because I wasn't really focusing on the interview. It'd be like, oh shit, I just said a load of crap there. Why did I ask someone something like that? Now I still do that, but sometimes I leave that in now because.
Yeah, me too. There's times when I'm like,
see that, I've just said something stupid. It's just there, really.
Well, just like what I've done then, trying to interrupt you and stuff like that. Or yeah, when I've asked a question, I'm like, why did they ask such a stupid question? But I'm more comfortable leaving it in now because, yeah, unless it's definitely going to ruin the flow, or that there's a real need to take something out, I don't know, it just occurs less to me to even waste time worrying about that stuff. What I wanted to ask you as well is, how has it been? I mean, I know we're in a strange time, right? And we don't know how it's going to play out. And I know in Berlin, we've been, for people listening, we've been blessed really, because lockdown here has been, I'm guessing, a lot less severe. I mean, I spoke to someone in France yesterday, and I was surprised to hear that. I knew it was tough there, but they have to write a note to themselves like it's in school and print it out. And I'm like, what do you do? I didn't get as far as what do you do when you haven't got a printer, but you print out this thing and it has to be signed by you in blood. and you have to write like, oh, I'm going to do a run or getting groceries or whatever.
Yeah.
It's quite strict. People do check, and you get stopped on the street. And I found out they're only allowed like 1K circle around their home, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
we've never had that here, right?
That's quite intense, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, how has it impacted you in terms of creativity? I mean, just for me personally, sometimes, I know we talked about this as well, sometimes the limitations have been good for me. I've been restricted in a certain way, and yet I might have a moan about it or get uncomfortable, but then the output's been really interesting and I get excited again from that. And yeah, I just wanted to ask, how has it affected you as a writer, as a podcaster? Has there been any impact in a negative way, or what's been the point?
Well, I mean, I think it's really hard to talk about and to sort of separate all of the things into different units. Like in some ways, I've definitely, feel like, I've got more time, to kind of get on and do things. But like, just talking about myself here, like, and it's kind of like disconnected from the rest of the world. But then like what I'm doing isn't really anything without being connected to the world at the same time. So it's a strange thing. Like, I'm sure like we all have it where like, some days I'll kind of wake up and I'll be really excited about something I'm working on. And other days it's just too overwhelming, like I'll kind of make the mistake of looking at the corona figures or something like that. Just my fingers are just like, like the fucking, like, it's like the kind of severed hand in Evil Dead 2. They're just kind of running at my phone, kind of looking at it. And I'm like, oh, Paul, why did I just fucking go and look at like the corona figures again? That now I'm just going to be thinking about that for the day, or just hearing about like something that crazy orange Nazi in America's done or something like that. It's just, there's always like something to kind of counterbalance. I don't know, it's just a weird time, isn't it, really? But I have found like within that I've definitely, felt it's something that whatever we're all going through. And so I think I just about me, for me, it's finding ways to keep myself motivated and keep flowing. And also like it takes away the sort of, there's a kind of element of bourgeois luxury about being the writer in Berlin, because from what we were talking about earlier on, you can live a bit cheaper here, and I definitely did a lot of flaneuring when I got here, which I think is a really, really beautiful thing, but it's also a real, not everyone has the privilege to do that. And so I feel like now it feels like there's this sort of time of going, right, if I'm going to do writing and if I'm going to do podcasting, it has to I have to really justify it to myself.
Yeah, I can get that. Yeah, and I think it's just awareness, isn't it? I mean, we're all guilty of it. I watch the news now and again. Luckily, I tend not to watch it. It's not a habitual thing, but now and again, I get bored or fidgety, and same thing. I'm like, oh my God, look at the numbers, look at this. And then I start wasting like half a day freaking out about some rubbish, right? But then when you flip out of it, it's okay just to notice you did it without bashing yourself, right? Because because creatively for me, one thing's catching yourself and having the awareness that you're wasting time, although you could argue there is no waste of time, right? But the other layer is, well, just be okay with it. It's happened. You can't take it back. So, and you're a human being, right? So just go easy on yourself. It's fine.
I think the most important thing is like, you've got to go easy on yourself, really, haven't you? Because you can't even be any good effect to anyone else if you're not looking after yourself. And I think I've definitely like sort of learning to sort of try and prioritize self-care. And it's, I think, being in sort of isolation and lockdown a lot, I think it kind of, I have found like the kind of advantages of sort of being able to kind of like, everything becomes really big, doesn't it? Like little decisions, I mean, sometimes in a good way, like what you're going to eat. you know, like I'll be on a limited budget and I'll kind of go, okay, I've got like a courgette, I've got half an aubergine, and I'll really think about how I can make something really nice out of it. But maybe before lockdown, I would have just kind of maybe like they would have just gone a bit more softer and squidgy in the fridge.
You would have just left it in the fridge, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So I think I'm definitely thinking about a lot more about those little things, and they become a lot more exciting in my life as well. Like I think like cooking becomes like a real ritual, you know, so like kind of like a meditation or something that I know is going to happen like in evening time, really.
Yeah, it's good that you can find those little moments, and we can do the opposite, right? What we've just said. Sometimes we can start to spin that wheel of freaking out about stuff and all, because everyone keeps talking about uncertainty, right? I wanted to ask your take on it, because for me, I mean, okay, I'm in the business of trying to help and transform people's lives by coaching them and giving them support. So for me, uncertainty is the normal. Like even pre-COVID, I'm as good as what we're talking about right now in this moment. And I know that sounds like cheesy coaching talk, you know, but it really is true. Reality is we don't really know how to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone 6 months down the line. And let's be honest, without getting dark, COVID today, next week it'll be climate change and some other massive calamity. But let's be honest, as a human species, we can deal with it. But I think in one sense that we just need to get our shit together, because I think the climate piece, that one requires us all to actually change the way we're looking.
Yeah, there's something very definite about that, isn't there?
Yeah. COVID's a tricky one because we can't really control it. I know you could argue that there are people like pharmaceutical companies, governments, they have more traction to be able to do something than we do as an individual person, right? But yeah, when we look at other things that are uncertain, yeah, they're a little bit more tangible on us, right? As an individual person, that we may have to change our lifestyle to be able to actually still have a planet, you know, well, not a planet because the planet will be there, but a habitat for us to actually be able to still live and do what we're doing and have this conversation even, you know?
Yeah. Sorry, I got so what was the question? Sorry.
It wasn't a question. It was just reflecting about uncertainty. But what I was saying is, how do you see it for you personally? Do you think it's magnified it, or have you always been okay with not knowing?
I mean, I don't like not knowing, but I think, you know, sort of being a freelancer for like most of my life, and sort of doing creative pursuits, choosing to do creative pursuits most of my life, it's like uncertainty's always been there. Like, you know, I've never really had much money, and a lot of the time, you know, there's a point where I'm kind of fine with that. You know, I you know, sort of, I don't, you know, I think, you know, I kind of made a choice to kind of put time into doing things that I found rewarding, like making stuff. And that's choice for me, you know, and, but yeah, definitely. I mean, there's uncertainty can be a, well, fucker, really. But I think I just get, you know, I'm so used to it, but it's just sometimes there's more levels of it. Sometimes, you know, uncertainty is like something that you can kind of put aside and you can put in a cupboard and not think about. And you can kind of tell yourself, and you can kind of, you know, really genuinely work it through, go, okay, that needs to be sorted out, but I don't need to think about that till January. So that's okay, you know. And then other times it suddenly is January and you've not done anything about it, then it becomes a problem and stuff like that. And so it swings and roundabouts. That's a classic English expression, isn't it? Swings and roundabouts.
All right. And I think as a freelancer, I mean, I can identify that, you know, I'm working for myself as well. And, you know, there's a lot of times when I've had no money, you know, you just get used to it, right? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason I was going there is what just occurred to me is that if you're used to doing that, you know, you're creative, you're a writer, you're a musician, whatever, you're more likely to be prepared for uncertainty than you might even hazard a guess to thinking that you are, right? So what I'm saying is that you're kind of preparing for opportunity because you're so used to not knowing when, for example, the next paycheck's going to be.
Yeah.
But you are deeply creative because you're obviously writing and, you know, doing all this stuff. So that's kind of I don't want to say future-proofing you, because no one can be that way. I mean, you can think that you are, right? But we don't know because it's uncertain. But I'm guessing that the more creative you are in the kind of fields that we're talking about, you kind of are navigating uncertainty in a better way than someone who's got a fixed job, a fixed view of the world. And I think the reason why I was going there is people who are not from that world, who are more, they thought they had this safe bubble. That reality was completely shattered when this happened, earlier this year.
Yeah.
The more I'm talking to artists, and not to say that some of them have been freaking out, of course, and we've all had our moments, me too. But what I'm saying is that more creative people seem to be dealing with it better, if that makes sense, because they were always used to the uncertainty, COVID aside, if that,
Yeah, I mean, quite a few people I've spoken with kind of sort of saying that aside from the sort of, the feelings of the feelings of fear and the feelings of, what the pandemic means in a certain way, like the actual time it's given them, have given them a lot of time for reflection. Like a lot of, particularly like DJs and musicians, spend like the vast majority of their life touring. And so suddenly it's like they're kind of grounded, and aside from future worries about wanting to tour again, and also like the need to kind of perform as part of their career and their life, it's like I think a lot of people I spoke to kind of actually enjoyed just having that period of time last year to just kind of slow down. Maybe they hadn't slowed down like since their careers, since they got into a groove with their careers. I definitely remember speaking to a couple of people that just felt that they hadn't had time out for years, and suddenly they're in their houses and they're able to just kind of watch films and play a bit of guitar, but just like as you would pick up in the corner of a room and strum some chords and stuff like that. I definitely think, and as a creative person, when you're a freelance person, when you're constantly not really sure where your next check's going to come from, or like you're constantly waiting for an email about whether something's going to go ahead or not, you kind of got it inbuilt that there's always a level of uncertainty. So in that way, I feel like I was a bit like, oh well, this is happening this week in a really weird way, and that's nothing to do with like the emotional feeling or the kind of feelings of the seriousness of it, but it's just in terms of just like, okay, this is what I'm dealing with this week. It's the same as like maybe like a contract got cancelled,
Yeah, I get that. And I was going to talk about, there are artists that are lucky that they were making money before this happened, right? And they're lucky that, I mean, I mentioned Ellen that you interviewed recently as well, and that was another cool one because she was in a very reflectful mood. I mean, she's a deeply spiritual person anyway, as you probably know, but it was good to hear that she just got this unique time that she'll never get again, I guess, to completely slow down rather than smashing the air miles and being in one country for the next every weekend DJing. But there are, as we know, I've been there myself where you've had some limited success. You've worked in the industry, but they were struggling even before COVID because the industry. I don't want to start picking on the music industry. Say it's all creative industries, but these people were struggling anyway. And then all of a sudden, they've got no means of income. And yes, we could argue that they should be getting creative and get excited about what they can do afterwards, but then, because they're not working for someone, it gets tricky. I mean, I know Germany's a little bit better than, say, certain places in Europe. I mean, I was shocked really how artists were pushed down the pecking order. People who were furloughed who had a proper paycheck for doing something non-creative, working in a business. But anyone who's in the arts, it was like, chin up, mate, go and get another job, which was really shocking. So what I want to ask you is, how are you about the arts in general? Because my concern is that there's always going to be people coming out of it hitting the ground running, as we've talked about. But I see the whole arts thing being completely eroded, and the longer we stay in this situation, and the lack of funding. I mean, we've already seen some amazing institutions give up the fight, and they've already closed, right? And I mean, just in the electronic scene, clubs alone, already the real estate people are. They're waiting in the ranks for this, the club to be closed, and then guess what? No surprise, they'll build flats there, right?
Starbucks, where About Blank used to be, or something like that. But I mean, obviously, I think it's just like creativity has always been a little bit undervalued in terms of, I don't know, and I felt like this as a growing up. I wasn't really very good at school. Like I was really good at art and English, creative writing English, because you could actually use your imagination and stuff. But like I was really, really, really bad at like pretty much everything else, because it kind of occurred to me that at least in the school that I went to, which was like in North London in the sort of in the 80s, that you had to kind of basically just memorize information, like if you'd be sitting an exam for geography or maths, and it was like, can you memorize this and can you kind of like regurgitate it? And my brain didn't work like that. I didn't think logically. And so I always kind of grew up feeling that I was quite stupid, really, and then also, so I kind of encouraged myself to take as much sick days of school as possible, so I kind of fell out of the system as well through that. And then because of that, I started to get bullied, because I was like the weird kid that couldn't sort of, express themselves in the kind of recognized way to kind of get ahead at school. I wasn't physically strong as well, so I didn't have PE to fall back on as well. And in the 80s where I was living, subculture hadn't really reached that part of town. And then like, I kind of just noticed that for me, the massive difference came was like when I think I got to hear like the Pixies and Nirvana and stuff. And it just like literally changed my life in the space of a week. Like just being able to like, I remember I was just at sixth form college, and some kids came up to me that I knew from school, and they kind of bullied me a bit at school, but I think we'd had like a long summer and they'd chilled out a bit, their hair had started to grow, and they started to wear like, do you remember those green German army jackets that everyone used to wear? Yeah, and like they were smoking like the Golden Virginia and stuff like that. They weren't like jocks anymore, and like they were like, do you want to come on lunch break and have a cigarette on the hill? And so I was kind of really excited because they weren't fighting me. And and then like they gave me some headphones, and it was the Pixies on the headphones. And like it was just, I've not really heard anything like it at all. I was just not really engaged with music in that way before. And it wasn't just the music that really excited me. It was like the fact that like they were welcoming me into something that just didn't really fit into anything that school gave me at all, anything like that. And I think that kind of gave me the confidence to start sort of, like believing in the kind of the fact that I could do art and writing and things like that. And also that, you could kind of, you'd see like sort of Kurt Cobain on top of the Pops and stuff, and just think like, what the fuck is that man? It's amazing. It's like everyone loved him, but he was this really scruffy guy who would wear like t-shirts by obscure bands, who was really feminine at the same time as being sort of just like, having like Courtney Love as his partner, and who was kind of like the biggest star at the time, yet was also like really obviously like a bit of a social misfit, and someone who felt much better like kind of maybe scribbling on a piece of paper or something like that than kind of communicating to the world. And I think that kind of gave me strength to kind of view creativity as a force. And then I think from that, I kind of started to slightly give less of a shit about what was expected of me. And sorry, this is a really massively long-winded way of explaining or going on about something. But like, I think, yeah, I think I kind of started to have a bit of faith somehow in the fact that like, there's always going to be the kind of what I'd call the straight world, and like the man, as they used to call in the 60s, and I sometimes perhaps lazily and unfairly call anything to business as the man. There's always going to be that, and like they're never ever going to understand creativity, but they will love it when it makes sense to them. But they won't understand ever the processes that artists have to go through to do that, and they won't, because it just doesn't quantify. A lot of creativity comes from just being able to kind of you know, like I could work at my laptop all day long and produce produce absolute jack shit. But then as soon as I go away and make a cup of tea, suddenly that whole day of doing nothing kind of crystallizes into one idea, you know, and that makes no sense in a quantifiable way, you know. And so I think that's why it's really, really, really hard for people that decide where budgets are allocated to sort of understand the value of paying creatives, because they don't, you know, they just kind of see us as being like interesting, funny pets that come up with stuff. But yeah, it's a different way of working, really, isn't it? And it requires just, you know, things that don't make sense in a capitalist society in order to function properly.
No, and I think you framed it well, and I actually liked the way you navigated it, because I can resonate. I got spat out of the school system with barely anything qualification wise, and my musical upbringing was pretty much jumping over the wall, sneaking off to Liverpool on the ferry and hanging around the record shop, and the guys in the record shop, who's this kid? And they just took pity on me and started giving me vinyls, you know, and I was just like, oh my God, what is this, you know? And it did save my life, because I actually thought I was a bit dim, because these adults were very stale, and I'm not going to blame them, but they just didn't know how to handle me. And yeah, when you said I was kind of there to just memorize some stuff that honestly, I didn't give a shit about really, but you know, and as I got spat out of the school system, it was only really my parents that were freaking out. I was kind of like, well, okay, that wasn't cool. I'm ready to deal with the world now. So I was kind of half excited and very naive because I was young, you know. But
yeah.
DJing, and I did some more adult stuff later on and realized that actually it's not the education bit or knowledge or learning. It's just, as you say, it's for whatever reason, we still haven't, as much as all the advances in technology and psychology and, you know, all of the things we've got as far as, you know, learning about humanity, we still see creativity in that frame of being an artist as something scary in a lot of camps, right? And yeah, I'm not surprised that funding, it's the first thing that goes, right? It's the first thing that when Brexit was announced, I could see all of the European arts funding disappearing and people freaking out about it. And yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised it's not being funded, but I'm just a bit, I guess, in the grieving process right now, because I can see how it can play out. I'm not saying that there'll be no art, because that would be, it's not possible. And that's why I'm still excited, because let's be honest, even if they get rid of everything, it just starts things afresh. It just resets.
Yeah.
Though I wouldn't want that, because I think we've got a rich cultural history in every country. And I know, especially where we are right now in Germany, we've just seen things eroded in less than a year. And that's what I'm pointing at, that, you know, what could we do now? And maybe nothing. I don't have the answer, but I think we know why, because there's just that complete disconnection between people who don't see themselves as creative, and they don't feel connected to art, culture, creativity. You know, they just don't identify with that. But it's really strange, isn't it, that these same people who may pull the plug, they've all been to theatre, they've all been to see a play. I'd be really surprised. Some nightclubs, you know, different things, and they'd be the first people to complain when all of a sudden they're like, why is there no culture? Why is just existing a bit shit and boring? It's because, well, you pull the plug, and we didn't support that stuff during that time, so therefore we've got nothing open right now, or at least we don't have any infrastructure because we switched it off.
Yeah. I mean, what also I think is interesting is that, like, I think so many kind of creative, I don't know, scenes is the right word, but movements or whatever, come out of people with no resources, come out of people with no money, just using whatever sources they've got, you know. You kind of, you know, whether, you know, and so it's kind of weird at the same time as we've got this huge industry of creativity. That's actually, I think, in some ways different from what creativity actually is as a thing, you know. And so it's like, it's just part of human nature to create. And so there'll be, I don't know what, you know, and you could almost argue in a kind of punk way, you know, that you need to have cycles and things need to be destroyed and regrown and stuff like that, which is, you know, I don't know if I how much I fully would endorse the destruction of a lot of things, the cultural institutions that I love, you know, so don't get me wrong there. But at the same time as that, like, you know, it's all cyclical, and art has to be relevant to everyone, doesn't it? You know, or but art, it's like, say for example, if like Berghain funding just got dropped for Berghain and it closed, there would be this absolute outrage in Berlin amongst clubbers. Most of the clubbers would be at least over 20. I don't think many people under 20 would give a shit at all. And then they're probably too busy like doing things that we're too old to even know that will be the culture of the future. So in a way, who gives a fuck?
You know, that's a really interesting way of taking it, because I don't know about you, I got curious about what is really going on. And I know we talked about this, you know, in another conversation, that we talked about the plague raves, and I was saying, well, you know, when I was younger, when the rave happened, it was because it was proper anti-government, because they were trying to control a population, and they were scared of, you know, they made it all dirty and drug takers, when actually it was just fresh and new, you know. What I did, I got a bit curious, because I'm like, you know, I'm not young anymore, we're kind of relatively similar age, right? And I was like, what are young whippersnappers doing out there? What are they doing behind the scenes? And even in my neighborhood, right, there's you know, in Prenzlauberg, there's those water towers, right?
Yeah.
So underneath, I don't know if you've ever been in there, but there's this structure. It's a really, I've not actually been inside it, but I've had a little peek. And there was an installation all the way through COVID, and I still don't even understand what these kids are doing, but it looked cool. And they put the system in, and they'd done this weird arty thing, and they were still going, you know. And this restrictions, and it wasn't like an illegal rave. They'd actually did it properly. But I'm like, wow, who am I to say that it's not working? Because people younger than us, they're like, well, okay, that's gone, but you're the older generation. We've got something young and fresh, and and they probably don't even stop for air or even reflect. Because I know when I was young, I didn't. I was just enjoying it or doing whatever made sense, right? And just going with it. And I think so. What are you saying then? You know, we've heard this conspiracy theorist thing about the Great Reset, right? Which I don't really buy into it. I think it's a bit naive. But I mean, a great reset of art and culture. I'm not saying we should do that, right? Just for people listening. But if it did happen, I'm sure, you know, many exciting things would come from it. And I don't know about you, I speak to a lot of artists of late as well, have said, is there anything new coming out? I know there is, but you know, some artists get frustrated because they're like, we've done everything, especially musically, right? And they're saying, you know, what's next? Because we've had, you know, in our lifetimes, you know, you've had, as you say, rock and roll, you know, we've seen all of these wonderful artists that were really strong artists in their own right, and they really forged a way forward, right? And then we're in this kind of culture where, dare I say, a lot of people are still telling me that it's a bit stale right now. I don't buy that fully, right?
No, I can understand that. And like, I mean, on one hand, like, I really like, say, like the writer Simon Reynolds, you know, music culture writer, and then he wrote that book Retromania, where he's kind of saying how, like, so many, like, since the 90s, like, so there's been such a lack of new ideas, and things have become recycled and stuff. And you know, I'm not really an expert on postmodernism, but I kind of feel that that's probably a word that's like potentially associated with that, or whatever modernist, whatever post era we're in. But then I also sort of think it can be kind of something that is usually kind of like grumpy white men sitting around, middle-aged grumpy white men, like, not us, of course, not us, but the kind of saying that everything's been done before, you know. And I think it's also, there's so many new ways and things that do need to be readdressed. I think in a lot of ways, 2020 has been massively exciting in terms of like, you know, something that we have to kind of culturally shift and go through, you know, in terms of like raising, you know, like issues with diversity, issues with kind of making sure like all different kinds of voices are heard. But, you know, I look back on the 90s and it seems like a golden era to me, you know, because I'm sort of like, for me it was, I didn't realize at the time for a lot of people it wasn't, you know. So maybe we got to go through this now, and even if a lot of cultural institutions have to do a lot of questioning and a lot of that, just to sort of create some kind of balance, or we have, I don't know, maybe I'm phrasing that wrong. I don't think we've been listening to everyone that's needed to be listened to. I don't think everyone's voices have been heard at all. And so I don't think there can be a way we can say that everything's been done when the people that have said everything's been done haven't been listening to everyone.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. And I'm pretty sure if we were, you know, sent back in a time machines during the days of rock and roll, there'd be older people than us saying, "Oh, we've done everything."
Yeah, definitely. Bloody hell! Where can you go after bebop? Where can you go after hard pop? That's it. It's just done.
There's kids, you know, younger than us saying, "What are they? What you're on about? Like we're fresh. No one's heard what we've done yet, and we're gonna be coming at you. You know."
Yeah, I think it's always, that's the great thing about it. It's like there's always new combinations of things. And I think a lot of like, I don't know, I kind of feel that quite often, you know when something feels really good, when you've just combined two things together, you know, they might not be new things, but like the way you've combined them together feels new and fresh. And I think that can be kind of infinite.
It can be, and everything is a remix. I mean, you hear that a lot, and I really looked at that because some of the work I do is really going deep in researching and creativity and stuff. And yeah, and there is an element because you could argue that everything's kind of already existed. But I find that exciting because the best artists, I mean, all the people you interviewed have recycled stuff, or they've been blown away by something, or that's influenced them in a way. They might not even reference it, or might not be aware of it, right? That's another thing. We can't even be aware for ourselves or comprehend all of the things that have even got us up to this point. And because all of the things that you haven't seen, that means it's a limitless amount of creative avenues to go down. And I guess that, you know, if you're kind of saying that, and I've been guilty of it sometimes, I've run out of creative juice, you know, my engine's finished. And then as you say, the next day, because usually for me, I know I'm going through a transformation because I hit a massive brick wall and I have a bit of a cry.
Yeah, same. The biggest existential nightmare. You have a total meltdown, and you kind of think about like moving back to your parents' house, and then suddenly, like the next day, it's like you're like Sherlock Holmes. It's just got a case.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of creativity, that you can't be proud about when it's going to happen. Although, you know, as a professional, you have this as well. We all have sometimes a timeline because someone says, right, you've got to have that article in by this date, or, you know, if you're signed to a label or whatever. A lot of the times where we stifle ourselves isn't when I'm on the clock. So for example, when I got to Berlin, I had releases coming out, and I was lying to the world and, you know, like tricking myself, saying, yeah, we're going to write an album now. I did nothing, right? And it had no constraints. That's the problem. I had enough cash to keep me going and make music and even book a studio or whatever. And what did I do? I mean, I don't regret it because I made such good contacts by just going out and pushing it on. It's funny that the people I speak to, there seems to be a common pattern that if you give someone too many options, too much time, that can also be a problem. But as you said, sometimes creativity, and this is what the business, again, I'm not putting any blame, but there's a lot of a disconnect or a misunderstanding, right? And it's quite innocent that sometimes in the world of business, people want something done tomorrow. Even the creative industry's got like that. That's why I stopped doing post-production and sound design, because they were like, you've got 5 minutes, here's your brief. And I'm like, nah, this isn't cool, you know? But sometimes you do need months of just sitting looking at the wall or sitting looking at a pot plant, because that can also be amazing and transformational. And I know a lot of artists are very comfortable just saying, well, I'm going to do nothing, because as you said, that's going to yield some amazing results down the line. But in the world of business, they're really scared of doing that, right? For good reason as well, because I know they make money in time. But the more I've seen business innovate and disrupt is when they have become really comfortable. Again, this circles all the way back to the conversation with the unknown, and just being okay and letting their employees get 2 weeks away, you know, go off and do whatever, or, you know, every month they get out of the workplace and do something that's absolutely disconnected from what they do. Because I don't know about you, I mean, workplaces or even offices in general, I'm always kind of because for me they're very clinical, a bit too clean, and also they're not really the kind of places where you can get really creative, right? So you've got this problem where businesses are like, yeah, you know, they're trying to force people to get creative, But the very thing they need is just to stop the clock for a minute and just to have a laugh. Go out drinking one night, do whatever, and then resolve that problem they've been sitting looking at for the last 2 months, right?
I mean, there's that whole kind of cliche about like sort of like having like fun rooms in like workspaces and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like there's a sort of, I think it's all really just really intuitive, I feel, isn't it? Like there's certain times where you need to put that pressure on yourself, and you need to sort of establish like deadlines, even if it's for yourself. And then there's other times where that's just not going to work, and it's really, really hard to know the line. And I think that's kind of an art in itself, or maybe that is actually just what art is just working, being able to kind of decipher things like when you need to put pressure on yourself and when you need to not, and when you need to kind of like what references you're drawing into it and how you edit something, it's sort of very curatorial, isn't it? Like you're kind of like, there's an art to managing yourself.
There is, right? And it's all experiential learning, right? As we said before, that you can learn all these things. And I mean, it's amazing that you can just YouTube whatever. I'm guilty of it, I'm watching other fellow artists or whatever. And it's good. You can get some good, useful information. But it can also be actually quite disruptive, because you can then just start to lose your own identity, right? And I think every good artist, or this has been my experience when I speak to them, they've just got comfortable not knowing. They've got comfortable finding their own very unique way of working. And they're not really too bothered what everyone else is doing, although they will check in and they're curious, because creatives are generally curious about everything in the world, right? But they're more relaxed and comfortable because they've actually broke it. The wheels have come off and they've been like, well, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this.
Yeah, and I think it's also what we see quite often of is like an end result, and with like a kind of a little bit of like, a little bit of maybe through interviews or something, or a little bit of a summary of how that end result got there. But I think also within that, like, there's a lot of, like you were saying earlier on, there's a lot of dark nights of the soul that kind of go into that making as well, and it's kind of weird. Like, I think, like you were saying as well, it's like, it doesn't matter how bleak a moment I'll have with an idea or not having an idea, like the payoff of when I get the idea or when things slot in makes that just, I completely forget about it. It's like, you forget what it's like to have the flu until you get the flu again. It's like that kind of sort of thing. It just goes. It's like, oh, I'm fine now. Brilliant. Excellent.
Well, that's a really good point for people listening. That, yeah, I mean, we're not saying, right, just to be clear, that all arts should be painful, because that's very cliche. Right?
No, there's a horrible cliche about that, and it's not about that. But I think it's just about it. For the way I'd sort of mean to say it is about being intuitive with yourself, and I guess it's about being really gentle with yourself when, rather than art shouldn't be painful. But the fact is, when you have times when you're blocked and when it doesn't make sense and you can't think of an idea, that's when you have to have that little voice in your head that kind of tells you that it is okay. That is just a really natural part of the process, and it's shitty, but like, get some really nice biscuits and watch The Queen's Gambit for 2 days and take some good walks and speak to your mum, and then maybe like, once you kind of remove yourself away from looking at the problem, then maybe there'll be an answer, maybe there won't, but there's no science to it.
That excites me. That's been my experience as well. That it is frustrating and it can be deeply annoying, right? When you can't get the output you want, but it can't be forced. And the more you just get comfortable with that, because
that's right.
Listen, it's okay. Although at the time, it's not okay. But
not okay at the time. And it's not about it's not about glorifying the pain of the artist. It's about making itself, about understanding that we all suffer, and to be gentle with ourselves through that suffering. It's about having compassion for the difficulties of like having to use parts of your brain that don't always want to. They're not going to go to work at 9 o'clock every day just because some other jobs have to go to work at 9 o'clock in your day. The parts of your brain that create say, I'm not getting up. They're listening to, they're teenagers. They're listening to Rage Against the Machine in their bedroom. They're refusing to go to school. you know, until you've done something that you haven't worked out to make them work, you know. And that could be going to a gallery, or it could be like, you know, taking a break from work, or it could be just actually working through it, you know. It could be, but yeah, it's weird. It's a constant set of puzzles, and it's so important to be really, really, really gentle to yourself around that and support yourself around it.
And that goes back to what we were saying before. It's all about that awareness and self-care. The more I see artists being comfortable in their own skin, they've actually just learned how to protect themselves and not be like paranoid or lock themselves away from the world. They're just like, well, this ain't working. I'm going to go and see a friend, or like you say, I'm just going to go and watch a movie. I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to make a nice meal, do whatever. And even the painful bits that we all go through, let's be honest, after the fact, which is always easier, right? In hindsight, it's like, yeah, why the hell was I worried? And I let you say, look what I've just written. Like, holy shit, that's pretty cool. But it was like, oh God. Oh. It's like,
yeah, totally. And I guess that just makes, like we were saying earlier on, that makes no sense in business time to think like, okay, you have this genius idea, but it maybe took like 2 months of just nothing to do that. You know?
Yeah, but I mean, that's the reality though. All of the disruptive products or technologies, I mean, if you look at the backstory, which no one really shares because everyone wants it, you know, all shiny, and look how easy it was to do this.
Yeah.
Been going at it for years, or they've failed massively, and there's many iterations. And even there's a backstory to these people who suddenly everyone thinks that everything they touch turns to gold. That's rubbish, really. Or at least in what I've seen, it's very rare. You know, all of the artists that I really resonate with, again, not that they've gone through lots of pain, but they've just gone through lots of iterations and being cool with that. Because for me, that's part of the exciting journey. If I'm in experimental mode, I don't know about you, what your process is, but that's not the excitement for me. I know that I'm not going to get there, but actually some of those failures, for example, when I wrote music or when I was performing live, like it or not, I couldn't have reversed engineered that. Some of those fuck ups live on stage or during a live performance or in the studio actually made the thing more human and connect with the crowd better. And I could never have put that as a plan, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And I also sort of feel that sometimes like the really, 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 the ideas that I have that I feel are really, really good, like they feel like somehow like they've always been there. Like there's always something like, you know, like I could be like, say, I'll have to like, when I'm writing, I'll kind of like do a bunch of pitches to press and see if any get picked up on. And sometimes I can feel like my inner ham come out, my inner hack. And I'm kind of like sort of thinking, oh, I don't know if I believe in this. Yes, it totally makes sense, but I don't know. Let's see who's you know, like maybe someone will pick up on it. But like the ideas that sort of get taken up, I kind of really feel, you can just tell when you're writing, they just flow through you, you know. And it's the same with like the podcast bits that when I know it's going well, it's like, or it's like when you hear like we've all had songs in our lives that sort of we've heard by other people that, I mean, yeah, okay, maybe like the chord progression is going to come from somewhere else, you know, but at the same time as that, they just kind of go through us. Like we've always heard them, they've always been around somehow. And I think, I don't know whether that's because something kind of just speaks a universal truth, or maybe we just relate to it so much. I don't know why, but I just feel there's something just so truthful about when you know deep down when something's working or not, don't you?
Yeah, I can't bottle that. And I've, like I say, I was doing a lot of research in terms of what is creativity, where does it come from? And there's a lot of things that resonate. You know, I don't know if you know Elizabeth Gilbert, you know, the famous author.
I don't know.
There's a book called Big Magic, worth checking out. And she just talks about, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which I wasn't really a big fan. You know,
no, I think there's a film with Julia Roberts.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. So she's the author and written a lot of fiction, famous for that. But she's also more recently become more of a philosopher, which is really cool. And she talks about the same thing. She's like, you know, I used to think about it this way. And, you know, you put your ego and say, look, I'm an amazing writer and this is my output. But it's more like you're a conduit. You just, the satellite's in the right place and you're just there and it just happens and it falls into place. And you don't really know how you got there, but you're quite kind of happy with the results. And That's kind of it for me. That's the way I approach making music or actually anything creative now. I kind of have an idea and I'm like, yeah, I'd like that to happen. But in the past, I was so beaten up on myself to get to that place that it
Yeah.
would, if that makes sense. So now I'm kind of like, I'd like that to happen, but I'm actually excited to what kind of output or whatever happens. And the more I do that, I just get lost in my own little world, but in a good
Yeah.
way. And the
I
output,
think you're kind of sort of saying a bit about like you're trying not to second guess yourself as well, you say.
I don't know about you, it's like putting a lid on it. It kind of stifles creativity straight up,
Mm,
right? Because if I'm like, it must be this and it must be exactly how I want, usually you don't get that, right? And actually, by me going, look, I've got a basic idea. So, for example, when I make music, I'll pick a couple of bits of hardware, hook them up, and I'll be like all mad scientist, like, oh, I'll put this delay here and this will happen. And actually, it never happens how I want it.
mm.
But from an engineering perspective, it does what it says on the tin, but creatively, it comes out in a weird and wonderful way. And that for me is exciting. Whereas before, I was like, no, it must do this. I'm going to use this exact plugin. I'm going to use and it got really boring and no surprise I stopped making music for years because of it.
Yeah.
I tortured myself and I listened back to the stuff I got released and it was rubbish. I was like, well,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's cool to see how far you get, right? And why, for me, when I listen to music now, I can tell exactly what state of mind I was in when I made it and why I was struggling. And I'm actually just more curious and interested in that than embarrassed that I put it out there and it's in the public space,
Yeah, no, yeah, totally. I think when I was making music, like I had this kind of, because growing up in the '90s, like sort of really kind of being a music fan in the '90s, like, and like we had like all of these different sort of like, I was really into like things like Britpop for a while, and like I was kind of into house a little bit, but and like you also had like sort of like really good '90s hip hop and stuff like that. So there was all this kind of sort of amazing kind of stuff going on, but I think there was also this kind of culture because I grew up very much like someone that would read NME and Melody Maker rather than being a musician, and so rather than knowing technique, I was kind of a lot more familiar with like how albums were praised, seen as being masterpieces and stuff like that. And so when I got into making music, it took me a long time to realize that I wasn't trying to make the best thing ever, and I try and keep that to what I'm doing now is just to make something that feels true for that moment, really. And you can go back and you can do another version of it another day. You can kind of carry, if there's an idea that you couldn't quite grasp, you can go on to do that the next thing sometimes.
That's a really good point about the fact is you don't have to put out
It's not about making the masterpiece. I'm not one to judge what, we can't judge what like our masterwork's going to be. This is going to be the book that will make me, this is going to be the new Catcher in the Rye or something like that.
I was going to ask you as well. I had this all the time where, everyone's going to love this. This is going to smash it. All of this, whether it's me writing a piece, an article, or putting out a record. And it was always the opposite. But I was humbled. Like some of the stuff I was like, oh, this is rubbish. And then people were really taking it on like, wow. And it got me annoyed because I was like, I don't know then, they like the stuff I hate. They hate the stuff I like, So actually, the more that you don't have anything on it. And if you're just like, well, I'm cool with that. Let's just see how it lands. That have real impact, right? And is that how you are as a writer? You're just like, well, I'm cool with that. I'm going to see how the rest of the world sees it,
I have to feel good about it. And that's how I know when something's ready. Like it will literally be a mess of words until it's ready. It's like it's like a lot of the editing is like kind of sort of arranging a jigsaw puzzle really until the words just to me feel right, and then in what I agree with what you're saying, but there's also this sort of sense that it has to like it does again, like I said earlier on, it has to feel like it's coming through you, and I know that point where to me it just works really well. I mean, yeah, there have been a few things that have kind of come out where you're up against the deadline and you get it done the best you can, but I'm not, but even then it still has to kind of reach a level. But yeah, I know when something's right, it just comes out. But then after that, you just never know, do you?
I think it's
like,
good.
I can't second guess what other people are going to think of something. And
no, and it's such a double-edged sword and a total waste of time, right? Because I know when I used to put stuff out, I mean, you know this yourself, any creative, I was sending demos off, the most soul-destroying thing in the world, so I used to think. And I've become so happy to do it, because I was like, I'm excited to see what these people think, because, you know, you get to make friends and you have all these people you trust and you like send stuff to. Whereas before it was like, oh my, you know, back in the day, it was old school, like literally bubble wrap envelopes on the floor, sending CDRs out. And I was like, fuck, how much, you know, it was also like, how much is this costing versus, you know, can I eat? And then all of that stress and anxiety about putting them in the bloody post box. And then I just crossed the path where I think you just have to have a certain amount of output before you just stop caring. But I don't mean you don't care about your craft. You just don't get as emotional, and you're just like, well, you know, I've learned now. Again, through all that iterations and failure and experimentation, you just find your own rhythm, right? You find your own way of doing what you do. And if you still love doing it, you carry on doing it, right?
Well, I think you kind of find a point where, like, which I think is just like, I don't even think it's just about creativity. It's about a certain kind of point that people get to at different points in their lives, that where you go, this is me, fuck it. You know, I do the best I can. I try and be a good person, and I try and make my kind of the work I put out, like, you know, like I really, really believe in it, and I really believe in every action I take. But if people are either going to accept that or they're not, you know. And like, I think, you know, like, it's like when I was in my early 20s, it's like I was always trying to sort of impress people, you know. It's like I always want to say the right thing and just be cool or whatever, you know. And then you get to that point of going, like, actually, you know, you just get too old and too tired and too lazy to do anything that isn't yourself, really, you know. And it feels more glaringly obvious when you do something that you don't feel has come from yourself, you know. I think
a lot of energy, doesn't it, as well? I mean, you learn just from experience that, it's just too much of a hassle. You know, you just need to show up and just be yourself, and you just have to learn that. And it's not just the creative space. You know, we work with our clients that way, leaders, right? We're always saying, look, the more you just show up and be you, that's what people love. Even though you might not like things about you personally, guess what? That's all you've got. You know, there's this lovely quote, I don't know where it came from, but it's like, you can only be you because everyone else is taken, like, you know. And I've copied people because I put them on a pedestal. And, you know, I love copying musicians when I was young because I didn't have the technical ability to do anything better. But then as you learn, you're like, well, okay, I've got my own take on it now. And you can apply that to anything. And like, it's not with age, but you just need to have a bit of mileage before you get comfortable.
I think so. And I also, I mean, I think, I mean, again, having said that, there's this whole generation of, like, particularly music, there's a whole generation of kids that, like, I don't know, like, that are, like, born with digital stuff and can use, like, Ableton, you know, as children, you know, and so maybe, like, you know, I imagine, like, walls are kind of shifting on those parameters, like, a lot, you know, in terms of creative output. Like, you know, when you sort of see, like, albums being made by 17-year-olds that feel like, you think, you know, with the maturity of someone that's, like, well older than that, you know, and it's just, you know, kids that have, you know, known how to use that technology their whole lives. It sort of boggles my mind. Whereas for me, like, you know, I was sort of struggling to use a computer in my early 20s, and, you know, like, accidentally wiping tracks off a 4-track recorder because I didn't know how to use it, you know. I think, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, I can't remember what the question is again.
I think we've just been rambling, haven't we? Because I've really enjoyed the conversation. No, I get what you're saying, because I don't mean mileage in age and, you must be to make something good or do anything in life, because that's rubbish, right? I've seen kids, especially in the arts, like musicians that I've resonated with, and I'm like, where did that kid come from? Like, totally grounded, doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks, and in a good way, and just smashed it, put it out there. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, and some of the people, like, I think it wasn't it like Herbie Hancock was like something like 15 years old or something when he was doing those Miles Davis albums and stuff like that. Like, and like Dizzy Rascal's first album, like he was 17 when it came out, which must have meant he was about 15 when he was making it.
Honest, I think that's what really had traction for him, because it was just really to the heart, close. You know, it was grimy, it was real, and it wasn't polished, and it was quite gnarly. You know, a bit of aggression. It just worked, right?
Yeah, totally. But I do know what you're saying in terms of the essence of it not being connected to age, but in terms of like coming from some other place about kind of, I don't know. There's so many kind of like instinctive biting points with creativity, aren't there? There's like the point between being naive and fresh about something and that being an amazing thing where you get like such a buzz of freshness in the ideas, and a point of maturity in terms of not giving a shit about certain things about yourself, or having that inner confidence in terms of yourself. And it's just constant little navigations. And I think this is, again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier on, that these are things that are really hard to quantify. They have to be felt. And you use skill in that, you know, like obviously like the better you are as an engineer can have a sound a certain way. If you want to have an orchestra, then, you know, having people that can play the instruments is a benefit, and how skilled they are is a benefit, you know. But in terms of making the judgments of what is right or wrong for something is weighing up so many things, that some of it's art, some of it's science, and it's just knowing, having a gut feeling of what to pull from and when something's right.
Yeah, exactly. And look how many artists, I mean, I don't know about you, I love reading about artists' journeys. That's why I loved listening to, you know, talk to Peaches. And yeah, it just reminded me, I love listening to how an artist went from this raw whippersnapper who just like came out of nowhere, and then later on, and with a bit of maturity, there's no right or wrong. They just had a different flavor because of reflection, and they've got more mileage. It doesn't mean, it's not for me to say whether it's better art or not. It always is different. And that's just through our own, I guess the whole conversation we talked about, just through experience, just through feeling away and learning, experimenting. And that's
reflecting what's around you as well. Like
everything in the influence of where you live, how you live, people around you, everything. I mean, we say about kids, right, that, you know, at a young age, we're like sponges, we absorb stuff. But I actually still think that adults do that. We lose that awareness because we become this boring, stale adult form, you know. I don't think we ever lose the child in us, if that makes sense.
No, I think maybe it gets hijacked a little bit by the things we sponge in. You know, maybe we sponge in anxiety a bit more, and we sponge in scrolling, you know, and things. Sometimes I'm totally guilty of those things. Like I'm terrible. What's your worst social media addiction?
Oh God. If you were to ask me, I mean, definitely scrolling aimlessly. Yeah, definitely the infinite just flicking through until I'm like mesmerized, and then suddenly someone taps me on the shoulder and says, "Peter."
You're like, whoa, I've been in some kind of weird dimension, you know. Definitely. I think I can lose out, you know. Sometimes like I'll kind of, for me, it's like when I have like the days where I'm kind of doing emails and stuff, they're the worst, because like there's this list of emails I'll be working through, then I'll come out of a trance and realize that I'd finished all of the emails, and I'd actually spent like an hour or something just like maybe thinking I'm waiting for an email reply, but I've actually just been in Instagram or something like that. And I'm just, what have I done with that hour?
Not often as well. Like I had anxiety. I'm like, you know, the poor guy's got no awareness that I'm waiting for them to reply, right? How stupid is this, you know? But like, yeah, you know, I sent them an email 3 days ago. Why are they not replying? And, you know, Mira's like, are you crazy? He's like, close your laptop, for God's sake, get outside, do, you know, because you do something different, you know. You can't do that anymore. Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of it now. And again, it's going back to what we said before, having that awareness and not bashing yourself. So if you spot it, just stop, right? But the other to that is
totally.
That was stupid, but I'm not going to bash myself. And that goes back to the self-care aspect. What I was going to ask you as well is, so you've got your podcast going on now. Is there anything you can share? I'm just curious and a bit nosy. What's next for you? You know, have you got any cool guests you can talk about? Or
I like to keep the guests under wraps because it's like exciting that way. But yes, but like in terms of like I'm just trying to keep my eyes open and keep connected to what I think is real. And I know that sounds really, really, really cheesy, but I feel like when, and I think it's connected to what we're talking about as well, like when I kind of veer off that, like when I start to kind of write like a hack, or, you know, when I feel like I write to kind of just because, you know, you've got the pressure of getting bills paid, and I've got the pressure of getting bills paid. And so the anxiety of going, okay, fuck, I need to kind of just like get 2 writing pitches this week, you know, and then sometimes the quality control in my mind doesn't work so well. When that happens, you know, and none of those pitches work anyway. It's just like, so I think for me, it's just literally finding ways to stay truthful to what I'm good at doing and what I feel like I can communicate to the world with about. So, and right at the moment, that could be anything. There are things going on, but they're all kind of in the process. They're all a jumble of different, right until you'll read them yourself. They're a mess.
Yeah, I'm just being cheeky asking that because I would.
No, I love it. It's cool. Go for it. Yeah.
I think it's good for people to hear that because, yeah, I'm just in constant experimentation mode anyway with a lot of things. And that's how we apply stuff. Whereas before I was kidding myself saying, you know, it has to be this way, like we talked about, and very rigid. And that didn't work, if I'm honest. And the more I'm just like, okay, with not knowing, and just like, well, podcast is going on. I've got this happening. But the new stuff, I'm just got nothing on it. Let's see. And if I get excited about it and it bears some fruit, I'm going to release it and people will know about it, right? But until that, yeah, sorry, can't tell you anything because I don't even know my own head, right? Sometimes.
Yeah. And also, like, you can kind of you can talk yourself out of it. Like, I've definitely done projects in the past where it's like I've talked through about it. Then I was like, I don't need to do the project now because I've just talked about it. You know, that is actually it. You know, that was my explanation of it was better than the project would have been itself. Done. Goodbye.
Well, when I've been interviewed and suddenly blurred out, usually I'm with Mira as well, and she's looked at me like, why have you shared that with the public? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
No surprise, right? Never been kind of thing. But yeah, going on to that as well, are you a advocate of nothing is ever a waste? Because I don't know about you, I used to embarrassingly get angry and delete tracks because I was like, that's rubbish and all of that. But I think there's always fruit. Not that you should keep everything, right? But I find that sometimes, you know, you touched on it before, it just wasn't ready to go out. It just wasn't, something wasn't quite right. But rather than delete it from my life because, oh God, I got annoyed that it didn't bear any fruit, I just move it into that box of, that's a possibility that will come later. And I've had stuff even 2 years plus just take shape and form. And then people around me who I trust and know and love, they're like, that's not you, mate. You know, you had that idea over 2 years ago. I'm like, and then I get really like, really? You know? And they're like, yeah, you told me that ages ago. So yeah, that's just been bubbling up and developing, right?
Yeah, I have that a lot actually. I think I'm trying to be better with myself with like, if I'm not feeling something very quickly is to move on, to leave it. But yeah, it doesn't get thrown away. Like in a technical sense, I use like some kind of filing system where I'll have like a kind of like a virtual drawer for like sort of ideas that I'm just a bit about, you know, and then occasionally I'll either look at them or, you know, it's what's more likely than not is I'll be walking along the street and something will remind me of it because it relates to something that I've just thought or something going on, and it kind of becomes resuscitated. But like, yeah, I think I try not to kind of like stay on an idea for too long when it's just like a sort of in the idea stage, and then you just got like a big back catalogue. And I mean, the great thing is you don't really ever need to sort of either throw anything away or keep anything either, because it's just like, it's going to stay in. I mean, I guess what you're saying with like technical, you know, if it's music, you know, if you've got files of stuff, you're going to sometimes have to make a decision if you want to free up storage or not. But
before it was because of a lack of funds, right? So I only had so much space. And like many musicians you've probably spoken to, I got caught with my hands burnt when I didn't back it up. And that was brutal moments where
I've lost half an album that way once.
You know, even that, I know it was horrible at the time. I'm like crying for days, but to be fair, that was transformational as well, because guess what? You've got no other choice. So
Yeah.
it cleared the way for me not to get so stuck in the past. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer, and I just go with whatever happens. Although I'm like everyone else, I still have to go for the grieving, you know, if something's not cool at the time, you know.
Yeah, and like you said, no, it's actually really cool. Actually, so I think there's something really, really, really amazingly uplifting about like when something goes wrong and you have to think of a plan B, and then suddenly you get the plan B, and it's like it always reminds me of like one of those things in a film where, you know, the main characters are just like that. It's all gone a bit wrong for them, and they're like on retreat, and they're in like some warehouse or something like that, and like a bit 18 style, and then they've got like half a tractor and like, you know, a disco light, like a disco mirror ball, and they go, how are we going to get out of this? And then they somehow kind of do something like really cosmic with it and save the day. Yeah, I love those moments, although I haven't really used that particular combination of a disco light.
Yeah. And you can use that. I mean, I meet many artists that use that as a creative process as well. And by the way, I mean, this conversation's been great, but I'm even trying to reflect on how do I put this to a close, because we've just been rambling like 2 hours.
Oh yeah. I don't mind really. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I guess we've just had a kind of a good ramble about creativity.
Yeah. There's so much gold in it, and you know, before I'd be like, oh my god, how I was rubbish there. We let it go all over the place, but no, there's some really good stuff we touched on. Is there anything? Because we usually ask this kind of question, and yeah, Mira wasn't here today because we ended up having to speak to someone, and we tried to move it, didn't happen. But
no worries.
Is, you know, just out fresh out your head, is there anything you think makes sense to share? You know, knowing that we've covered a lot of ground, is there anything else just imparting that you want to share with people listening?
You mean about anything?
Yeah, anything.
Do you know what? I'm actually okay with what we've got, really.
No worries. Let's press the stop button then.
Cool. Yeah.